Hey guys! So I am here today with my Fenrir deck profile. I got top 8 with it at BCS Netherlands, fee premium 2 weeks ago, I think. Yeah, so let's get right into it. So right off the bat, Fenrir is kind of a very complicated deck, so I'm not gonna go by it grade by grade. I'm more gonna go by it strategy by strategy. So first off, you have one of the cutest starters in the game. Next, we have 4 copies of Fenrir himself. So a lot of people, I feel like, don't really understand what Fenrir does and tries to do. So Fenrir is a complete toolbox deck. So you can literally basically search out anything you want in your deck as long as you have something of the same grade in your soul. Furthermore, it almost every turn gets plus 10 on attack for a Soul Blast, and you can call whatever you Soul Blast to the field for an extra attack for 1 counter blast. So right off the bat, Fenrir gives you a lot of options and different ways to play the deck. Next is his main supporting guy, Gleipnir, also at 4 copies. This guy is amazing because it's also a form of a toolbox, meaning that everything in your soul can be added to hand for a counterblast. And every time it attacks, you can Soul Blast 1 to give it plus 10,000 instant end of turn. So this is one of the best beat sticks in the deck. We have Ulysses at 3 copies. So Ulysses collaborates really well with Fenrir because Ulysses can attack on a force 1 marker to be able to hit, then immediately go to the soul for a draw and a soul charge, and then when Fenrir attacks, he can use its skill to Soul Blast Ulysses and immediately call it back again. So that is one of your main early plays, especially your first grade 3 play. So that really keeps your hand and your soul very, very healthy. Next, we have 2 copies of Apple Witch Cider. Very similar like Ulysses. You can search it out with Fenrir's toolboxing skill, immediately call it, and at the end of the battle it attacks, your soul gets bigger and it goes to hand. And it has an amazing defensive skill based on the number of cards in your soul. So that is kind of the main outline of the deck, and now we're gonna get into the core. So I basically made my deck around this unit, Valencia. So for those of you who don't know, Valencia is one of the best Genesis cards in regards to when you Soul Blast her in the main phase, she can bind herself and put 1 card from drop zone into the soul and another one on the bottom of the deck. So basically, Valencia allows you to put triggers back into the deck. You might say, oh, they're only on the bottom, but because Fenrir toolboxes every single turn from the deck, you shuffle the deck every single turn. So every time you use Valencia, you can immediately then use Fenrir to shuffle the deck, and then your trigger consistency is back up, which is very, very nice for Genesis because you do end up soul charging your triggers a lot of the time. So Valencia really, really balances this out. She also has another fun skill that sometimes is really useful. When after boosting, she can put herself and the thing she boosted into the soul to get a draw. So that's nice for clearing your field for certain matchups and adding to your hands. Now to support Valencia, we want to use units that Soul Blast during the main phase because Fenrir doesn't do that himself unless you already use a toolboxing skill. But you generally want to wait with it because you first want to use Valencia and then you want a toolbox so that the triggers end up back throughout your deck. So what I decided to use is a very niche card, honestly, Fiscus. So this card is very, very nice. As long as you and your opponent have the same grade, you can play a Soul Blast, check the top 4 cards of your deck, and add a Witch or a Sorcerer to your hand. The rest goes to the bottom. So at least half of my deck is Witches and Sorcerers, so this is already a nice way to quote-unquote accidentally plus. But the main thing, of course, is the Soul Blasts, so that you can instantly trigger Valencia first. We have 2 copies of Melissa. This is one of my favorite cards in Genesis because it's a complete chaos card. You never know what the situation is going to be before or after you use it, but It's also a card that triggers Valencia. Valencia honestly pairs quite nicely with it, because then the Soul Blast 3 cost is discounted a little bit immediately. And furthermore, Melissa is a win condition in itself for this deck. So against any other deck that goes through it quite heavily, or a lot of Excel decks that leave their fields quite full, doing Melissa twice in a row makes them go deck out. If you think about it this way, if you're facing a normal opponent and they have a full field of 5 units, using Melissa twice gets rid of 10 cards out of their deck. So if you do this mid to late game, a lot of times you will kill all of their last options, or you will simply just make them go deck out. So this is a really, really nice niche option to win certain matchups.
Can confirm Gold does not like this card.
It's a very good option against Gurgwit. It's also a very good option against Tavas.
Which is currently considered the best deck in V, so that's
Exactly.
a pretty good...
Next, one of the main boys of this deck as well, Fenrir. So, Fenrir for a Soul Blast can retire one of your opponent's rear guards, which is already an amazing tool in itself, especially combined with Melissa. Because with Melissa, you never know which cards are going to be called from your opponent's deck. So if you keep a Fenrir in your hand, you can still retire some of the good stuff that Melissa might get out of their deck. It's also a way to trigger Valencia again, but one of the best options that Fenrir has is it can stack your deck. So after attack, it can go to the Soul, and then you check the top 3, and one of them goes on the top, one goes to the Soul, and one goes to the bottom. Now, what a lot of people don't realize about this is, yes, you can use this before your Vanguard attacks, so that you can stack your drive checks, but you can also use this after your Vanguard attacks, so that you can potentially stack a defensive. Once again, very, very useful against Excel decks like Gurgwit and Tavas. Then, a little bit of the grade 1 version of that card. Arctic, when she's called, you can check the top 2 cards of your deck, one to the Soul, one to the top of the deck. This is also a way to stack your deck, only works on place though, but its second skill is also an amazing synergy with Fenrir. Whenever the Vanguard attacks, the Vanguard and Arctic will get plus 5,000 power. So in attacking orders, this is very, very nice, because usually you swing with one rearguard unboosted, then you swing with Fenrir, Soul Blast and Counterblast to get the 4th attack in, and then Arctic will trigger. And then Arctic, with the 5,000 power boost, can boost the new unit you called out. Also nice to know with Valencia, so you already increase your trigger advantage by putting triggers back into the deck. And these 2 guys make sure that you can filter your deck even more and stack the deck so that your odds become even more increased. Then we can go to our main win condition of the deck, 3 copies of Rappler. So as we covered, Valencia is the core of this deck, and you try to trigger her as much as possible to put triggers back into the deck. And then you use Arctic and Fenrir to stack and filter your deck even more so that your odds of checking triggers are extremely increased. Now what Rappler does is, on attack, it can copy all the power and criticals that one of your units has gotten through trigger effects this turn. So you use Valencia, you use Arctic, you use Fenrir, you check at least 1 trigger during your Vanguard swing. Then you can swing with a rearguard that has 10,000 and a crit, and then you can use Rappler, and you can also give it 10,000 and a crits. Also nice to know that not a lot of people probably realize, you can also just give the trigger power to Rappler, and Rappler can copy its own trigger power and critical as well. Then we go to the last card in this deck, and this is more of a niche tech option as well. This is Veratrum. It's honestly a lot like Melissa, but it's during the opponent's turn, and it can overcall only 1 card. Only 1 card that is standing, so you can't overcall on attacking units. The cost is a little bit steep, but in some situations it's extremely, extremely useful, because some decks get very disrupted by it. For example, you can really fuck up the attack order of Tavas rearguards if they don't think about this card. But the most fun part is in combination with Fenrir and with Fenrir. Because, like I said, Fenrir can call something at you Soul Blast, but it's not limited to your turn. So if you use Verotrum, you can immediately call out a Venarigunder and then use Venarigunder to force a Denial Griffin. So you can retire the attacking units. So this is a very steep cost, of course. It's Counterblast 2, Soul Blast 4, but I have used it in very clutch situations. It's also particularly effective against Nitros, because when they go for the killing Skull Dragon turn, you can completely stop it using these 3 units in combination. I used to call this my anti-Nitros combo when Nitros were still a very, very meta deck.
And it might be once again with the V promo.
Exactly. So yeah, this is the deck that I used for BCS. I am not gonna lie, I am thinking of making a few more changes now that I see what's happening to the meta with all the new promos that are coming out for V. But this is still a very, very fun list. It's not easy to get the hang of immediately. You kinda have to play differently than other decks. It's not just beating someone until they die, it's really thinking about your deck consistency and your odds of checking triggers. Those are your main win conditions. But nonetheless, it's a very fun deck to learn, and it's very fun to see how confused opponents are when you play it. Kind of forgot about the trigger lineup, but it's honestly a very basic trigger lineup. 4 Heal Guardians, 4 PGs. You might ask why I just don't run more crits to have more odds with Valencia, but I am still deathly afraid of Astral Poets. So this is why I still run PGs, because I hate getting sacked out by Astral Poets. And then, of course, 8 critical triggers as well to maximize your odds of critting your opponents. To highlight some of my matches maybe, my first match was against someone playing Bang Dream. But honestly, both of us were bricking very hard in that round, but eventually I won it out. Then I played against Crushing the Meta, against Harth with his Spike Brothers. So first time we actually played against each other, I really, really enjoyed it. I'm not gonna lie. I was very, very lucky with my defensives, and it's probably the reason why I was able to beat him out. But that's also one of the things in Fenrir. You think you're lucky, but it's actually your own deck manipulation that you're doing, which makes you more lucky in general. And then I played against a Giraffa player. It was my first time seeing the new Giraffa starter, so I really, really enjoyed that. It was a fairly fast win for me. I think the opponent was not getting all of the pieces that they needed. They also didn't go into reverse Giraffa, I think. Then I played against a Glendios player, which was, I mean, understandably annoying. So yeah, they locked one side of my field and then they were damage denying me. But the fun part about Fenrir, yes, you need the counterblast for the extra attack, but you are still completely fine without it. Especially against Glendios, you can really easily clear at least one column if you just use Cider, Ulysses, and Venarigunder the entire time. So then it's really hard for them to completely Omega Lock you, and you still get decent attacks out of it. As long as you have Counterblast, you still always have 3 attacks as well. And because you have force markers and they stack and stack and stack, it gets bigger and bigger every time. And then my last match in Swiss was against Hal with Luard, and that was my first loss of the day. He had a god opening, but he played really well as well. But yeah, there was not a lot I could do in that situation, so I still ended up second in Swiss. And then I went into top 8, and then my top 8 curse happened, of course. I always lose the first round of top 8, no matter what happens. That was against another Glendios player. He was extremely good. He had a god opening as well. I held out as long as I could, but eventually I went deck out.
Didn't he like open Craving Claw?
Oh yeah, he opened triple Craving Claw, and I couldn't guard any of them. So yeah, those are also the kind of matches where I'm thinking of changing my deck a little bit more, but in general, I'm very happy with how it performed, and I'm really, really, really hoping that V doesn't die anytime soon.
Yeah, V does have its merits still, so it's a fun format, as long as we end up getting Percival back at one point.
But yeah, I'm gonna play the new and improved version of my deck in BCS France in a couple of weeks. So if I get top 8 again, or if you guys want it, I'll share my deck list for that as well. I think that's it for me. If any of you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the comments below. Or if you have any suggestions for other deck profiles. I mainly focus on V Premium instead of Standard like the rest of my team. So if you want to see any of my V decks, be sure to let me know. Bye guys!